Welcome back. You're watching the Jacksonville History Show, brought to you by the Jacksonville Historical Society and Comcast. Our show is here every Wednesday night at 8, and our guest now is Gary Flower. Welcome to the Jacksonville History Show.
Welcome, Harry.
Gary is a county judge, a member of the board of the Historical Society, and in his spare time, a relic hunter and collector, mostly Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Or all early military.
And I guess we would say you're a second generation collector.
That's correct.
Because you got into it because your father was a collector.
He started in the mid-50s with an old mine detector, poking around South Carolina and Georgia, and sort of got me out in the woods with him. And actually, there's a third generation. My children are doing it now.
Now, how do you do this? You just go out in a likely area where some history took place, perhaps, and look for relics?
In the old days, that's how you'd do it. You'd figure out where a battlefield was, and then whatever wasn't state or federal property, you'd go real close and track their troop movements. Now it takes a little bit more research, spend a little time going through regimental histories, maps, overlays of old maps on new modern topographical maps, and then pretty much poke around in the woods and see where you get lucky.
I guess it's more competitive. More people are doing it now? More people interested in this?
Actually, the resurgence of this hobby started in the 60s with the 100-year centennial of the Civil War. Kind of died out a little bit in the late 60s and 70s and picked back up again with the Ken Burns series. So yeah, it's real competitive now.
And some of the likely spots are not accessible because they're parks and
Correct.
so forth. So you can't
That's
go
correct.
dig in a park.
Well, it's a crime.
Yeah, and furthermore, even on private property, there's maybe some gray area in terms of whether you can go looking for relics.
Well, the gray area all starts with, do you have permission from the owner?
Yeah.
For the most part, it's a wise idea to have permission. You're trespassing if you don't. And I believe that it's real important for you to get permission from the owners to be on their property, least you get arrested. So.
Well, let's start looking at some of your collection, and I guess we'll focus to some extent on some things that you found in Jacksonville.
Well, what I've done is I brought you down a bunch of different eras of stuff,
okay.
Starting with some Revolutionary War things. Actually, there was some Revolutionary War activity here in Jacksonville. There's a great account of the fires of a few British soldiers down on the, what would be the north bank of the river, about where the landing is. And so there's some Revolutionary War activity here. Our own Congressman Bennett wrote a book, The Southernmost Battlefield of the Revolution, the Thompson Swamp Alligator Creek Battlefield. And these are Revolutionary War items right here. Mm-hmm. This would be the top of a snuff box. This would be a shoulder belt plate across a cartridge box. And this item would be what they call a cross belt plate. And you see how it's affixed on the back of a militia belt, which held both a cartridge box and a powder horn.
Okay, let's continue with some of the other things.
All right. Next is the Seminole Indian War period and 1812 period, and that's the next era of military action. What I've brought you is some 1812 buttons. This is an infantry button from the War of 1812.
This would be from a uniform.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the large size, about 20 millimeter, with the shank, which is the part that's affixes it, obviously, where you sew it on. And these big U.S. buttons are from that era, 1812. And Jacksonville actually saw a lot of activity in the War of 1812. There was a nice sized camp down at where Fulton Point is. Mm-hmm. A lot of plantation action here. There was an invasion through Georgia all the way down to St. Augustine. There was a small battle in the swamp down around St. Augustine. So there was a fair amount of 1812 activity in and around the three-county area in northeast Florida. And then we moved to the Seminole War era. And, this here is about an 1812 militia-type plate, very similar to the plate from the Revolution, same items affixing it to the back of the leather. It'd be sort of a stud, and that came from an 18 war activity, an area with a lot of activity up here in northeast Florida. The next items are all items from the Seminole Indian War, and we saw a lot of Seminole Indian War activity here in northeast Florida. These are all Seminole Indian War era buttons. We call these one-piece buttons. That's the Eagle with an A, artillery button, made one piece with the shank in the back. And this is the type of stuff that we find a lot of down around Middleburg. where Fort Heidelman is and the neighboring camps. And there were a lot of Indian War forts down along the Florida-Georgia border, right above the Georgia border, Fort Moniac in Moniac, Georgia, a high number of them. And there was a lot of activity around this area, actually throughout the whole state of Florida, even down to the west coast as far down as Marco Island in that area. This is a Indian War era belt plate, eagle plate. The item, that's how it was affixed on the back. Stamped brass. And that's about what it looks like when it comes out of the ground in the sandy soil. This is a small U.S. plate, and you can see the progression of how they've changed from the small plate, Indian War era. Now actually is a cartridge box plate, and it has two pieces of iron that affixes it to the back.
Now what we're looking at, is this pretty much the way you recover them, or do you do some additional work to restore them, or what?
Actually, this is what they look like for the most part coming out of the ground. This is about as good a shape as you'll ever find one coming out of the ground. Depending on the soil conditions, the drain off, if there was fertilizer in a field, it depends on the condition of the item that you're going to get. But this is what they look like when they come out of the ground. This is a good example of an artillery shell. This is a Union artillery shell. This is the base of the shell, what most people call fragments or shrapnel. And this is what it looks like when it comes out of the ground. Just buffed off. This has been just buffed off on a wire wheel. It's generally a little bit more orange. And then what I generally do is put them in electrolysis. I put them through an electrolysis system in a machine. It knocks off all of that rust, brings it back down to the base metal, and then spray paint them with Krylon finish so they stay preserved and look like that. That's the first stage of it, and that's the second stage where all the rust has come off, and that's what they look like, virtually like it looked when it came from the factory.
And that's another cannon?
This is the nose of this particular shell. This particular shell is called a 10-pound Parrott, named after the inventor who invented not only the gun but the type of artillery shell.
And this is one, a complete one back there at the back.
Actually, this one right here is the nose section of a different variant of a shell. This one right here is called a Hotchkiss shell, and it was a 3-part system shell that had a lead band in the middle, which they called the sabot, or sabot, depending on how you pronounce it, and a cup. And when it was fired, it pushed the cup into the lead, which forced it into the lands and grooves of the cannon and made the projectile turn on its axis, which gave it distance.
And what are we looking at over here beside that?
Right beside it?
Yeah.
This is an Enfield musket. This was a British imported musket used by both the Union and Confederate troops. And this is the base butt plate in brass. The lock plate, obviously the hammer, and where the percussion cap went. And this is kind of how you find them. There's never any wood on them because they've been in the ground for 115 years or more. This is the trigger mechanism, the trigger guard, and the trigger. And part of the bayonet from that exact rifle, all found in about the same area, because that's what it looks like when it comes out of the ground.
Well, that must be a great discovery when you find one of those.
You don't find many of those anymore. They pretty much get found pretty quickly, so they're tough to come by.
And this?
The bayonet from the Enfield.
Okay.
Obviously, it wasn't working very well. It was snapped off, but that's what it looks like after electrolysis. And you can see something hit it, or it hit something else.
Okay, let's cover some additional.
Those are shoulder scales. Those items were found here in Jacksonville, right where the cathedral towers are. The townhouse is a cathedral, is exactly where those were found, back behind the church, St. John's Cathedral. And those were shoulder scales used by Union troops on top of their uniforms, and that's the end pieces of the shoulder scales. And that particular area where those were found was known as Goat's Hill. On any old map, sometimes they call it Billy Goat Hill. That was the highest point of land in Jacksonville, so obviously a strategic point of land, about a quarter mile from the river, which sat on high ground. And it was a very big Union infantry and cavalry camp there during one of the 4 occupations of the city by the Union troops.
Okay. And what is this?
That's a piece of sword guard from a Revolutionary War sword.
Now, how do you know that?
Well, if you pick up enough of them, you figure it out. But yeah, that's what it is. I know because it's thin, because of the material it's made out of. Generally, the Civil War sword guards are going to be a lot thicker, with a lot more brass. This is on the English designed, a lot of English and French pieces in the country at that time.
If I found that, I wouldn't know what I had found. I guess you've got to do some research to know what you're looking for.
Yeah, and you look in books, there's some great reference books, and you pick enough of it up. One of the mistakes people relic hunting make at first, and a lot of my friends have done it, is they find something. For example, generally they find these pieces of fuses and they think it's a piece of pipe. And so they'll pick a fuse up and they'll think it's a piece of pipe and toss it. I learned early on in life, after throwing away some valuable items, that I keep everything, throw it in a bag of whatchamacallit. That's what we call it, a whatchamacallit bag, or what is it bag, and start digging through it later on, and oftentimes I'm pleasantly surprised about what you find. So I pretty much throw nothing away, and it's also a good habit to kind of get whatever trash is out of the ground around you, because you'll just go back over it again and you'll dig another hole and
how far down
yourself.
Are you digging?
Depending on the size of the item. An item like a button, with today's metal detectors, the state-of-the-art metal detectors, you can pick them up at 12 to 16 inches. An item like this you can pick up at 2 feet. A larger shell, I found one this past summer in Virginia that was 100 pounds. It was down 6.5 feet.
Okay, and quickly, we're almost out of time, but tell us about
these
this.
items all came off private property, and I want to stress that, on St. John's Bluff back in the late 70s, and that's a cannon, cross cannon sign from a Union soldiers, what they call a kepi or a bummer's cap, and 4 friction primers, and these were used to ignite the cannon, some friction caps, and these are the musket caps, basically they're percussion caps that fit on the nipple of the musket, and a Union artillery button.
Gary, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We'll have to have you back and show us some more relics. Gary Flower, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
The Jacksonville History Show, and that is our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. Visit us on the internet at www.jackshistory.com for more information, or call us at 665-0064.